The empty grandeur. The city lights, a mosaic of ambition and ceaseless activity, dissolved into an indifferent blur beyond the panoramic glass of Leo's penthouse. He sat on a cream leather sofa, an isolated figure amidst impeccable taste. His apartment, a monument to architectural brilliance and financial triumph, typically resonated with a hushed elegance. Tonight it amplified a suffocating stillness. Each art piece, every custom-designed fixture, the meticulously curated objects, all seemed to gaze back as silent accusers, mocking the void that had taken root within him. He had constructed this opulent cage, and now he was its solitary, reluctant occupant. A half-empty glass of amber liquid gleamed on the polished ebony coffee table, mirroring the subtle glow of recessed lighting. He hadn't touched it in a while. The whiskey's bite offered no solace against the gnawing ache in his chest. His gaze drifted across the expansive living space, past towering shelves laden with first-edition books he seldom opened, past the grand piano that had stood silent for months. Each acquisition, chosen with meticulous care and considerable expense, was meant to signify a life well lived, a thriving partnership. Now they were merely things, beautiful, costly, utterly devoid of meaning. He closed his eyes, pressing the heels of his hands against them until faint stars danced. A profound weariness, impervious to sleep, had settled deep within his bones for weeks. Every morning he'd forced himself upright, donned the suit, and presented a perfectly sculpted facade of control and confidence to the world. He'd chaired board meetings, charmed clients, delivered impassioned speeches on structural integrity and aesthetic vision. Yet the moment he stepped back into this apartment, the mask would fracture, revealing the tremor beneath. He remembered Clara's excited gasp when they'd first seen the blueprints, her hand warm in his. "Our sanctuary, Leo," she had whispered, her eyes alight. It had been their sanctuary, a fortress against the world's chaos, a space where their shared ambitions and quiet affection intertwined. Now it was solely his, and it felt less like refuge, more like a tomb. His hand instinctively reached for the silver-framed photograph on the side table. It was from their Santorini anniversary trip, the cerulean sea stretching behind them, whitewashed buildings gleaming under the sun. Clara, radiant in a flowing linen dress, her arm linked through his, her smile genuine and unburdened. He recalled the feel of her hand, the soft curve of her waist, the easy rhythm of their laughter. She possessed a way of looking at him, a quiet knowing in her eyes that made him feel utterly seen, utterly loved. Now, her photographic eyes held a different knowing, a hint of something he hadn't been ready to acknowledge then. A wistfulness, perhaps, or a subtle distance he'd been too consumed by ambition to notice. A sharp, physical pang shot through him, a familiar ache now his constant companion. It wasn't solely Clara's loss, though that was a gaping wound. It was the erosion of the life they'd built, the future they'd envisioned, the very bedrock of his identity. He had always been Leo and Clara, the formidable duo, the power couple. Who was Leo without Clara? The question echoed in the apartment's vast emptiness, mocking his carefully constructed sense of self. He traced the outline of her face in the photo with his thumb, the cool metal of the frame a stark contrast to the warmth he remembered. Clara, ever composed, ever gracious, had delivered the news with a quiet finality that had stunned him into silence. No histrionics, no tears, just a gentle, firm declaration. "I need more, Leo. We've grown apart." His world had tilted, but he'd maintained his composure, nodding, accepting, offering the calm, rational response expected of him. He'd even managed a stoic, "I understand." He hadn't understood then. He still didn't. Not truly. He only felt the chasm she'd left behind. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Each breath felt shallow, every heartbeat a dull throb. He found himself pacing, a restless energy building inside him, a desperate need to escape the confines of his own mind, his gilded prison. The soft Persian rug muffled his footsteps, amplifying the unnerving quiet. He stopped by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the indifferent city. Lights twinkled, cars streamed, lives unfolded, none touched by the seismic shift in his own. A sudden fierce urgency seized him. He couldn't remain here, not tonight, not for another second. The air felt thin, the walls closing in. He needed to be out, anywhere but here. His mind raced, a frantic search for an escape route, a distraction, anything to silence the relentless internal monologue of loss and regret. His gaze fell upon his car keys, lying on the console table by the door. Their familiar weight in his palm was a small, tangible anchor in the churning storm within. He didn't know his destination, only that he had to go. The impulse was primal, an animal instinct to flee danger, even if the danger was purely internal. He craved air, space, a different set of walls, a different kind of silence. He needed a reprieve from the deafening echo of his own unravelling. His hand trembled slightly as he pushed open the heavy oak door. The cool night air of the corridor was a welcome shock against his heated skin. He stepped out, leaving the empty grandeur of his apartment behind. The silence within it was replaced by the distant hum of the city, a sound that for the first time in weeks felt less like judgment and more like a faint whisper of possibility. He didn't know what he was looking for, or if he'd even find it, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he couldn't stay. Not anymore. A trembling knock, the city's persistent thrum, usually a soothing backdrop, now grated on Leo, a relentless, taunting chorus. Each street lamp, once a symbol of urban vigour, seemed to pinpoint his unravelling. He walked for what felt like endless hours. The expensive leather of his shoes abrading against the indifferent pavement, his tailored suit jacket clinging uncomfortably to his clammy skin. His customary poise had vanished, replaced by a dishevelled wreck. He hadn't summoned a car. The mere thought of confinement, of articulating a destination to a stranger, was too much. Clara's memory, her fragrance, her laughter, her crushing absence, was a physical weight on his chest. He gripped his phone, a leaden inertness in his hand, its dark screen reflecting only the streetlight's anemic glow. Eventually his feet, almost independently, guided him to Finn's familiar, unassuming brownstone. It was a stark contrast to his own gleaming penthouse, yet always offered a sense of refuge. He halted on the worn stoop, the evening chill seeping into his bones, and fixed his gaze on the door. It was a sturdy, simple portal, painted a deep forest green, adorned with a knocker shaped like a stylized oak leaf. The prospect of lifting it, of breaking the stillness, felt monumental. His hand hovered, trembling, a silent battle raging within. The carefully constructed facade he'd meticulously maintained for years, that impenetrable mask of success and control, was crumbling. He'd always been the pillar, the one others relied on, the one who solved problems with a decisive flick of his wrist. Now that wrist trembled. A deep breath caught in his throat. He had no choice. There was nowhere else to go. His fingers, still quaking, finally closed around the oak leaf's cold metal. He lifted it, let it fall. The sound, a small, hollow thud, echoed disproportionately in the quiet night. It lacked his usual confident resonance. It was hesitant, almost apologetic. He waited, the silence stretching, amplifying the frantic beat of his heart. After a moment he heard footsteps, then the faint click of a lock. The door opened slowly, revealing Finn. His friend wore a comfortable, well-worn sweater, his dark hair a little rumpled, a book held loosely in one hand. His expression, initially one of mild curiosity, sharpened to surprise, then concern, as his gaze swept over Leo. "Leo?" Finn's voice was soft, immediately laced with gentle worry. He took in Leo's rumpled suit, the shadows beneath his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor running through his frame. Leo's tie was loosened, his usually immaculate hair now falling across his forehead, and his eyes, typically sharp and discerning, were unfocused and distant. He looked like a man who had not merely walked through a storm, but had been thoroughly ravaged by it. Leo found himself unable to speak. Words were a tangled knot of grief and confusion, refusing to untangle, to form coherent sounds. He merely stood, shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond Finn, beyond the doorway, lost in the chaotic landscape of his own mind. He felt utterly exposed, stripped bare of all his defences, and the vulnerability was excruciating. Finn, without a word, stepped aside, widening the doorway. His eyes, warm and understanding, met Leo's for a fleeting moment, conveying a silent invitation, a promise of sanctuary. Leo stumbled inside, the apartment's warmth a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside. He halted just past the threshold, as if unsure where to proceed, what to do. The air was subtly fragrant with old books and something vaguely herbal, a scent that offered a fragile anchor. Come in, Finn murmured, gently closing the door behind him. He didn't press, didn't demand explanations. He simply observed, his quiet presence a balm to Leo's frayed nerves. He gestured towards the worn but inviting armchair by the fireplace, where a low fire crackled softly. "Sit down, Leo. You look like you need a minute." Leo nodded, a jerky motion, and sank into the armchair. It embraced him in a way his expensive, minimalist furniture never could. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands, the accumulated weight of the past weeks, the past hours, pressing down relentlessly. The silence was punctuated only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant city sounds, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a comforting, understanding stillness, held by Finn. Finn moved into the small kitchen area, and Leo heard the gentle clinking of mugs, the whisper of water being poured. Finn didn't ask what Leo wanted, he simply knew. A few minutes later, Finn returned, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He placed one on the small table beside Leo, its warmth radiating through the ceramic. "Tea?" Finn said softly, his voice a low rumble. "Chamomile. It helps." Leo slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw tight. He looked at the mug, then at Finn, a flicker of something raw and desperate in his gaze. He reached for the mug, his fingers brushing against the warm ceramic, a small anchor in his storm. He didn't drink, just held it, letting the warmth seep into his cold hands. A tiny gesture of comfort that felt disproportionately significant. Finn settled into the opposite armchair, cradling his own mug. He didn't push, didn't pry. He simply sat there, a silent, unwavering presence. The soft glow of the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an intimate, hushed space. A tremor began deep within Leo, a shudder originating in his chest that shook his entire body. It wasn't just the cold, it was the accumulated grief, the crushing loneliness, the sheer, unbearable weight of everything he had been holding in. He tried to speak, to explain, to articulate the gaping void Clara's absence had left, the way his meticulously ordered world had imploded. But all that emerged was a choked sound, a ragged gasp that tore from his throat. His chest heaved and he fought against the rising tide of tears, the ingrained habit of self-control warring with the overwhelming need to break. He was Leo Maxwell, the man who never cried, the man always in command. Yet here he was, on the verge of shattering. Finn merely watched him, his expression gentle, his gaze steady and unwavering. There was no judgment, no pity, just an open, accepting understanding that slowly, delicately, began to chip away at Leo's carefully constructed walls. In the quiet sanctuary of Finn's living room, surrounded by the scent of old books and the comforting warmth of the fire, Leo felt an unfamiliar permission to simply be, to fall apart in the presence of someone who would not try to fix him, but simply hold the space for his brokenness. The tea sat untouched, cooling beside him, but its quiet offering, Finn's quiet strength, was already beginning its work. The facade of strength, painstakingly built over decades, was finally giving way, not with a dramatic crash, but with a trembling, hesitant surrender. The first storm. The clatter of the teacups against their saucers had been the loudest sound in Finn's small living room, a rhythmic counterpoint to the quiet hum of the old refrigerator. Leo had been staring into the dark amber liquid, the rising steam blurring his reflection, making the cracks in his composure even harder to ignore. He'd accepted the mug from Finn, his hand trembling slightly, a tremor he hoped Finn hadn't noticed. The quiet understanding in Finn's eyes, however, suggested otherwise. It was a gaze that saw through the carefully constructed veneer, past the expensive suit and the practiced smile, right down to the raw nerve endings. Then a sudden, violent crash erupted from the street outside. It sounded like a dumpster being thrown down a flight of concrete stairs, or perhaps a tree branch snapping under an impossible weight. The sharp, metallic shriek that followed was instantly jarring, slicing through the fragile piece of the room like a razor. Leo flinched, a sharp, involuntary jerk that sent a spray of hot tea over his hand. His breath hitched, catching in his throat, and his eyes, wide and unfocused, darted towards the window. The gentle warmth of the mug was instantly replaced by a cold, clammy sweat that pricked his skin. The sound had been a physical blow, a sudden rupture in the controlled environment he desperately clung to. His heart, already hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs from the day's earlier emotional onslaught, now accelerated into a terrifying gallop. It felt like a trapped bird, beating its wings against the confines of his chest, desperate for escape. His vision tunnelled, the edges of the room blurring into indistinct smudges of colour. He could no longer discern Finn's face, only a vague, reassuring presence. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on him, making each inhaled breath a monumental effort. He tried to speak, to articulate the sudden, consuming terror, but his throat was constricted, a tight knot of fear. A cold dread seeped into his bones, an insidious chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. It was the same feeling he'd had standing by Clara's empty bed, the same bottomless chasm that had opened beneath him when he realised the extent of his failure. "Leo?" Finn's voice, a low, steady rumble, cut through the growing static in Leo's mind. It was close, closer than he expected. He felt a gentle, grounding pressure on his arm. Not a grip, but a reassuring weight, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos. Leo tried to pull away, to retreat into himself, but Finn's touch remained, a constant, unwavering presence. His breath was coming in ragged gasps now, each one shallow and ineffective. The world tilted, threatening to swallow him whole. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if he could block out the terrifying sensory overload, but the internal storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving. "Hey, look at me!" Finn's voice was softer now, closer still, infused with an almost hypnotic calm. "You're okay. Just a noise outside. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt alien, a concept so far removed from his current state that it almost made him laugh. A choked, desperate sound that caught in his throat. He shook his head, a small, violent motion, unable to open his eyes. He could feel the tremors running through his entire body, a betrayal of the formidable composure he usually projected. He was unravelling, piece by agonising piece, and he couldn't stop it. "Can you hear my voice, Leo?" Finn pressed gently, his thumb rubbing slow, steady circles on Leo's forearm. "Focus on my voice, just my voice." Leo tried, he really did, but the roar in his ears, a frantic echo of his own accelerated pulse, drowned out everything else. He was drowning, submerged beneath a tidal wave of fear and despair. He felt ridiculous, a grown man, a successful man, reduced to this trembling, terrified mess. The shame only amplified the panic, creating a vicious feedback loop. "Breathe with me, Leo," Finn instructed, his voice unwavering. "In through your nose, slow and deep. Hold it for a count of 4, then out through your mouth, slowly, like you're blowing out a candle." Leo shook his head again, a desperate silent plea. He couldn't breathe. His lungs felt like they were shrinking, his chest tightening with an unbearable pressure. He was suffocating. "You can," Finn said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm here. I'm right here with you. We'll do it together. Watch me." Leo felt a slight shift in Finn's posture, a subtle movement that suggested Finn was demonstrating the breathing pattern. He forced his eyes open, his gaze unfocused, but he could just make out Finn's face, a blurred outline of calm resolve. Finn's eyes, usually twinkling with quiet amusement, were serious, filled with a deep, unwavering concern. "In," Finn murmured, his own breath audible, slow and even. 1, 2, 3, 4. Leo tried to mimic him, a shallow, gasping inhale that barely filled his lungs. It was excruciating. "Good," Finn encouraged, his voice a balm. "Hold it. Just for a second. Now out. Slow. Easy. Like this. He heard Finn's steady exhalation, a long, drawn-out sigh. Leo attempted to replicate it, a ragged, shuddering gasp that felt more like a sob. But a tiny bit of air escaped, a minuscule victory. Again, Finn urged, his hand still on Leo's arm, a lifeline. In. Feel your belly rise. That's it. Hold. And out. Let it all go. Leo focused, not on the fear, not on the chaos, but on the simple, rhythmic command of Finn's voice. In. Hold. Out. Each syllable was a small step back from the precipice. The world was still blurry. The metallic shriek from outside still echoed faintly in his ears, but Finn's voice was a steady beacon, cutting through the fog. He could feel his own erratic heartbeat, but now, instead of a terrifying gallop, it was a frantic flutter, gradually, almost imperceptibly, slowing its pace. The clammy sweat on his skin began to recede, replaced by a slight tremor that ran through his limbs. The suffocating pressure in his chest eased, just enough for him to draw a slightly deeper breath. He was still terrified, still reeling, but the immediate, overwhelming surge of panic was starting to recede, like a monstrous wave pulling back from the shore. He clung to Finn's words, to the quiet power of his presence. He had always prided himself on his self-sufficiency, his ability to handle any crisis, to project an unshakable strength. But here, in Finn's unassuming living room, stripped bare of all his defences, he was nothing more than a frightened man, and Finn was the quiet, unwavering anchor in his storm. Each slow, deliberate breath, guided by Finn's steady rhythm, was a testament to a strength he hadn't known he possessed, the strength to be vulnerable, to lean on another, to simply be. The facade, so meticulously maintained for so long, had finally cracked, and in its place, a raw, terrifying, but ultimately liberating honesty was beginning to emerge. Quiet routine, lingering shadows. The rhythmic hum of the old washing machine became a peculiar lullaby in the days that followed. Leo, accustomed to the silent efficiency of his own high-tech appliances, found a strange comfort in the mechanical groans and whirs of Finn's older model. He folded towels, stacked plates, and even, to his own astonishment, meticulously organised Finn's spice rack, a task he wouldn't have contemplated in his former life. Finn, with his characteristic quietude, observed these domestic efforts without comment, occasionally offering a small, encouraging smile or a murmured, "That looks good, Leo." His apartment, with its worn but comfortable furniture and the gentle scent of brewing coffee, became an unexpected refuge. The chaos that had been Leo's internal landscape slowly began to recede, replaced by the steady, undemanding rhythm of Finn's life. He watched Finn move through his day, watering a small collection of succulents on the windowsill, preparing simple meals with practiced ease, reading thick, dog-eared books in the armchair by the window. There was an unhurried grace to Finn's existence, a profound sense of being utterly present in each moment that both fascinated and disquieted Leo. His own life, by contrast, felt like a hastily constructed edifice crumbling under the weight of an invisible wrecking ball. The demanding schedules, the high-stakes meetings, the constant pursuit of the next big deal, all of it now seemed like a frantic, pointless scramble. He'd always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his world, to orchestrate outcomes with precision. Now adrift in the quiet currents of Finn's apartment, he felt the humiliating sting of his own powerlessness. The initial shock of his arrival, the raw, visceral panic attack, had dulled into a persistent, aching numbness. It was like a bruise that didn't throb constantly but flared with a quiet intensity when he least expected it. He found himself staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's contact, only to pull back as if burned. The thought of engaging with her, of dissecting the ruins of their marriage, felt like an insurmountable climb. He wasn't ready. He didn't know if he would ever be ready. One afternoon, Finn found him meticulously wiping down the kitchen counter, long after it was already spotless. The sunlight streamed in, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air, and for a moment Leo looked utterly lost. A cleaning cloth clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "Everything all right?" Finn's voice was soft, non-intrusive, Leo startled, dropping the cloth. Yeah, fine, just cleaning. He gestured vaguely at the gleaming surface. Finn leaned against the door frame, a mug of steaming tea in his hand. You've been cleaning a lot. Leo managed a weak smile. Occupational therapy, maybe? A beat of silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of city life. Finn didn't push, didn't pry. He simply watched Leo with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed defences. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, Finn finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, but you don't have to pretend everything's okay either. Leo's throat tightened. He wanted to scream, to rage, to break something. Instead, he picked up the cleaning cloth and resumed his pointless scrubbing. There's nothing to talk about, Finn. It's over. The words felt brittle, like dried leaves crumbling in his mouth. Over doesn't mean it stops hurting, Finn countered gently. It will, Leo insisted, scrubbing harder, eventually. Finn pushed off the door frame and walked over to him, gently taking the cloth from his hand. His touch was light, but firm. You don't have to rush it, Leo. He then placed his hand on Leo's shoulder, a reassuring weight. You just need to be here, right now. And if here means quietly folding laundry or organising spices, that's okay. Leo felt a tremor run through him, a familiar knot of emotion tightening in his chest. He still couldn't meet Finn's gaze, afraid of what he might see reflected there. Pity, perhaps, or worse, understanding. The quiet power of Finn's connection, his steadfast presence, was both a balm and a terrifying mirror. It showed Leo not the strong, unshakable man he presented to the world, but the fractured, vulnerable individual hiding beneath the surface. He spent the rest of the afternoon curled on the sofa, ostensibly reading a book Finn had lent him, but his eyes kept blurring. The words swam on the page, indistinguishable from the swirling thoughts in his head. He thought of Sarah, of the quiet resentment that had festered between them, of the words left unsaid, the apologies never offered. He thought of the life they had built, now reduced to a pile of legal documents and shared memories that felt increasingly distant, like scenes from a movie he'd only half watched. The sadness was a dull, constant ache. It wasn't the searing pain of a fresh wound, but the persistent throb of an old injury that hadn't quite healed. He knew intellectually that he needed to confront it, to unpack the emotional baggage of his failed marriage. But every time he neared that precipice, a wall of fatigue would descend, an overwhelming weariness that made the very idea of emotional excavation seem impossible. He preferred the quiet routine, the predictable rhythm of Finn's days, anything to avoid the daunting prospect of facing the wreckage of his past. As evening approached, Finn began preparing dinner, the gentle clatter of pots and pans filling the air. The aroma of garlic and herbs began to permeate the small apartment. Leo watched him, a familiar ache surfacing. It wasn't just the loss of his marriage that weighed on him, but the loss of the future he had envisioned, the certainty he had always taken for granted. He had been so focused on projecting an image of strength, of having it all together, that he had neglected the delicate architecture of his own heart. He knew Finn was waiting for him, patiently offering the space and the time he needed. And for now, that was enough. The quiet power of their connection wasn't in grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the unspoken understanding that hummed between them, a lifeline in the stillness. Leo wasn't ready to dive into the depths of his despair, but he was no longer drowning. He was floating, held aloft by the gentle current of Finn's unwavering support, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a quiet victory. The lingering shadows of his past remained, long and stretched, but they no longer consumed him entirely. He was beginning to see the faintest glimmer of light at the edge of his personal darkness, a light that seemed to emanate from the steadfast, unassuming presence of his oldest friend. It was a fragile hope, but it was there, and for now, that was enough to keep him from sinking. Rainy night confessions. The rain began insidiously, a soft patter against the window pane, growing steadily into a rhythmic drumming that swallowed the city's distant hum. Leo, curled on Finn's worn sofa, had been staring blankly at a documentary about deep-sea creatures, the alien landscape a mirror to his internal desolation. Finn, perched on a stool at the kitchen island, meticulously cleaned paintbrushes, the scent of turpentine, a grounding presence in the small apartment. The increasing downpour seemed to amplify the quiet, pressing down on Leo until the silence felt less like peace and more like a vacuum threatening to consume him. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and unused. "It wasn't always like this, you know," he began, surprising himself as much as Finn, who paused mid-stroke, brush suspended over a jar of murky water. Leo didn't wait for a reply, didn't even look at his friend. His gaze was fixed on the blurred world beyond the glass, where streetlight halos bled into the dark. The beginning, with Clara, it was incandescent. We were going to conquer the world, together. A bitter laugh escaped him, dry and hollow. Funny how together became synonymous with apart somewhere along the line. He picked at a loose thread on the sofa cushion, the small action a tether to the present. She said I was always gone, physically, mentally, emotionally. She said I built walls around myself so high she couldn't even see the top, let alone climb over them. He paused, the words feeling fragile, like glass shards. I told her I was building a life for us, a secure future. What good was a future if I wasn't there to share it? He finally looked at Finn, a raw, naked pain in his eyes that Finn had never seen before. I honestly thought I was doing the right thing. Providing, protecting. It's what my father did. It's what I was taught strength looked like. Finn simply nodded, his expression unreadable, yet his posture conveyed an unwavering attentiveness. He set the brush down, wiping his hands slowly on a rag. But she just wanted me, Leo continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Not the empire I was building, not the perfect life I was orchestrating, just me. And I couldn't give her that. I didn't know how. I was so busy being the strong one, the provider, the rock. I forgot how to just be. I forgot how to let someone else in. The admission hung in the air, a heavy, unarticulated grief. The night she left, she just looked at me, and there was nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness, like she'd finally given up trying to find me behind all the layers I'd put up. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. That's what hurts the most, Finn. The quiet resignation, the knowledge that I broke her spirit by trying so hard to protect it. The rain outside intensified, a crescendo of sound that seemed to punctuate Leo's confession. Finn walked over, settling into the armchair opposite Leo, his presence calm and solid. "She wasn't wrong, Leo," he said, his voice soft but firm, "about the walls. You've always had them. Even when we were kids, you'd charge head first into everything. But when it came to anything that truly mattered, anything that touched the core of you, you'd retreat behind that impenetrable facade." Leo flinched, but didn't argue. "I get it," Finn continued, looking away for a moment, his gaze distant. "The world expects men to be invincible, to carry the weight, to never falter, to be the stoic protector. And you, Leo, you always embodied that image perfectly. You always played the part, even when you were bleeding inside." He paused, then turned back to Leo, a hint of vulnerability in his own eyes. "I know what it's like to try and live up to an impossible ideal. To feel like you always have to be on. To be the one people lean on, even when you're crumbling." Leo watched him, a strange curiosity replacing some of his self-pity. He'd known Finn for decades, yet this was a crack in his friend's own carefully maintained composure he hadn't anticipated. Finn let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "My own quiet little battles, you know. Everyone sees me as the calm one, the steady anchor, the guy who never ruffles feathers, never asks for much. And I've cultivated that, I suppose. It's safer, less messy." He picked at a loose thread on his own sleeve. "But sometimes I wonder if I've just been hiding my own aspirations, my own desires because they seem too small, too insignificant next to everyone else's grand ambitions. Like painting, for example." He gestured vaguely towards his supplies. "It's just a hobby to most, a whimsical distraction, but for me, it's a language, a way to process everything I can't put into words. And sometimes, Leo, I dream of it being more, of actually making a life out of it. But the fear of failure, of being seen as frivolous, it's a constant weight. The confession hung between them, a fragile offering in the rain-swept night. Leo saw a reflection of his own fear of inadequacy, his own hidden desires in Finn's quiet struggle. It was a mirror he hadn't expected. Finn, the rock, the unshakable presence, had his own quiet battles, his own unfulfilled dreams. And for the first time, Leo felt a thread of genuine connection, not born of shared history or obligation, but of shared human fragility. "It's not frivolous, Finn," Leo said, his voice husky. It's beautiful. And brave. To want something so purely." He looked around the small, unassuming apartment, at the canvases tucked into corners, the art books stacked neatly on shelves, the subtle splashes of colour on Finn's hands. He saw not just a hobby, but a passion, a soul poured onto canvas. And in that moment, the weight of his own carefully constructed facade seemed to lessen, if only by a fraction. The rain continued its relentless drumming, but inside a different kind of quiet had settled, a vulnerable, shared understanding that felt surprisingly like a new beginning. A new laughter. The rain had subsided, leaving the world outside scrubbed clean and glistening under a nascent sun. Inside Finn's apartment, however, the heavy atmosphere of the previous night still lingered, a tangible thing between them, yet something had shifted. The confessions, raw and unfiltered, had chipped away at the polished facades each man had carefully constructed. Days bled into nights, marked less by the clock and more by the ebb and flow of their conversation. Finn, ever the patient listener, rarely interrupted, offering only an occasional hum of understanding or a gentle, probing question that seemed to unlock another chamber of Leo's carefully guarded past. Leo, in turn, found himself speaking of things he hadn't dared to articulate, even to Clara. The crushing weight of his father's expectations, the relentless pursuit of an elusive perfection, the gnawing fear that he was never quite enough. He spoke of his childhood, a sterile landscape of nannies and boarding schools, where affection was a commodity to be earned through academic achievements and flawless manners. He described the emptiness of his opulent life, the gilded cage he'd built around himself, mistaking material wealth for true security. Finn, sitting opposite him on the worn velvet sofa, would simply nod, his gaze steady and warm. Sometimes he would share a parallel anecdote from his own life, the pressure to follow in his father's footsteps in law, the quiet rebellion of pursuing art in secret, the shame he felt at not living up to a predetermined destiny. These reciprocal revelations weren't about one-upping or comparing suffering. They were threads, weaving a new kind of tapestry between them, richer and more intricate than the superficial fabric of their decades-long friendship. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, Leo was recounting a particularly disastrous corporate retreat, a tale involving a misfired paintball gun and a very influential client's pristine white suit. He'd started the story with his usual self-deprecating sigh, bracing himself for the familiar hollow echo of his own voice. But as he described the absurd sight of the client, splattered in neon green, his face contorted in a mixture of fury and disbelief, Finn let out a soft snort. It was a small sound, almost imperceptible, but it caught Leo off guard. Then Finn's shoulders began to shake, a silent tremor that quickly escalated into a deep, rumbling laugh. It was an uninhibited sound, full-bodied and genuine, completely devoid of the forced politeness Leo was accustomed to. The sheer unexpectedness of it, coupled with the image in his mind, triggered something within Leo. A strange sensation bubbled up from his chest, unfamiliar, yet compelling. He tried to stifle it, a lifetime of decorum dictating that such boisterous displays were unseemly. But Finn's laughter was infectious, a warm current pulling him under. A chuckle escaped Leo, then another, louder and less restrained. Soon he was leaning back against the sofa, his head thrown back, a sound he hadn't heard from his own throat in years escaping freely. It wasn't the polite, social laughter he used to offer at business dinners, nor the strained amusement he'd sometimes faked for Clara. This was a raw, visceral explosion of mirth. Tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, it felt like a dam breaking, releasing not just amusement, but a torrent of pent-up emotion. When the last echoes of their laughter faded, leaving a comfortable silence in its wake, Leo felt lighter, almost buoyant. He looked at Finn, whose eyes were still crinkling at the corners, a soft smile playing on his lips. In that moment, the sterile white walls of his own apartment, the meticulously arranged furniture, the carefully curated art, all seemed impossibly distant, alien. Here, in Finn's lived-in space, amidst the overflowing bookshelves and the scent of old paper, he felt a profound sense of ease. I haven't laughed like that in forever," Leo confessed, his voice a little hoarse, a hint of wonder in it. Finn simply smiled, a silent acknowledgement of the truth. He didn't press, didn't comment on the gravity of the statement. He simply existed, his presence a grounding force. As the days turned into a week, then two, the rhythm of their lives became intertwined. They fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were often quiet, Finn sketching at his easel while Leo read or sometimes just watched Finn work, fascinated by the way his hands coaxed life onto the canvas. Afternoons might involve a walk through the sprawling urban park nearby, where the crisp autumn air invigorated Leo's sluggish spirit. Evenings were for talking, for cooking simple meals together, for the low hum of Finn's stereo playing jazz, for those unexpected bursts of genuine laughter that now punctuated their conversations with increasing frequency. Leo found himself looking forward to these moments with an intensity that surprised him. He felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in what felt like eternity. Finn didn't judge his past mistakes, didn't offer unsolicited advice, didn't try to fix him. He simply listened, absorbed, and reflected back a quiet understanding that allowed Leo to untangle his own thoughts. A new feeling began to bloom between them, subtle and undefined, yet undeniably potent. It was a warmth that settled in Leo's chest whenever Finn's hand brushed his accidentally as they reached for the same book, a tingling awareness whenever Finn's gaze lingered on him for a beat too long. It was in the way Finn would instinctively know when Leo needed a fresh cup of tea, or when a change in the conversation was needed to steer Leo away from a particularly dark spiral. One night, after a particularly long discussion about the nature of love and commitment, the apartment was cast in the soft glow of a single lamp. Finn had been sharing a vulnerable memory of a past relationship, a poignant tale of unspoken desires and missed opportunities. Leo listened, his heart aching with a shared empathy. When Finn finished, a profound silence descended, thick with unspoken emotions. Leo looked at Finn, really looked at him. The lines around his eyes from years of quiet observation, the gentle curve of his mouth, the way his hair fell across his forehead, he saw not just his friend, but a haven, a sanctuary he hadn't realized he desperately needed. A surge of protectiveness, surprisingly fierce, washed over him, followed by something else, something tender and yearning. It wasn't just gratitude, nor the comfort of companionship. It was a pull, an undeniable magnetic force that drew him closer. He felt an almost overwhelming urge to reach out, to bridge the small distance between them, to touch Finn's hand, to trace the line of his jaw. The feeling was frightening in its intensity, a complete departure from the carefully compartmentalized emotions he usually allowed himself. It was soft, yet insistent, a quiet revolution stirring within the ruins of his former life. This wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something deeper, something that thrummed beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to fully unfurl. Leo swallowed, his throat suddenly dry, as the realization, warm and terrifying, settled over him. He wondered if Finn felt it too. The air between them, charged and alive, seemed to hum with the unspoken question. The deeper storm. The echo of unrestrained laughter still resonated in the space between them, a seismic shift that had fractured years of carefully constructed quiet. It had been a revelation, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into a facet of Leo he'd considered irrevocably lost. Days later, that exposed vulnerability felt like a live wire, sparking unpredictably. The quiet solace they'd discovered, shared glances, whispered confidences, had offered a temporary balm, yet beneath its surface a deeper tempest gathered. It began subtly, as such things often do, with a constriction in his chest he initially dismissed as indigestion. He sat on Finn's living room floor, ostensibly helping with a box of old records, but mostly just observing Finn's hands move with quiet grace. The commingled sense of dust and aged vinyl, usually comforting when paired with Finn's faint coffee aroma, now felt oppressive. The tightness in his chest intensified, a tightening vice. His breath hitched, a shallow, desperate gasp that failed to truly fill his lungs. The room, minutes prior expansive and inviting, began to shrink, its walls pressing inward. A strange, prickling sensation crawled beneath his skin, like a swarm of phantom insects. This was no mere tremor, no controlled ripple through his body. This was an all-out assault. He tried to anchor himself, to grip the worn rug, but his palms were slick with a sudden, cold sweat. His vision blurred, vibrant album covers dissolving into abstract smears of colour. A deafening internal roar eclipsed the gentle crackle of the record Finn had just queued up. It was a primal shriek of terror and despair emanating from within. Control was slipping, completely, utterly, and the sheer helplessness of it triggered a fresh surge of panic, threatening to submerge him. He squeezed his eyes shut, attempting to fend off the encroaching darkness, but it was already present, a swirling vortex behind his eyelids. Bile, acrid and sharp, rose in his throat. A strange disorientation washed over him, as if the floor itself had tilted. He was plummeting into an abyss, a landscape he recognized from his darkest nightmares, a place of utter solitude, adrift and forgotten. A warm, firm hand settled on his shoulder. "Leo?" Finn's voice, usually so steady, sounded muffled, distant, as if from the far end of a long, dark tunnel. Leo tried to speak, to articulate the crushing weight, the suffocating dread, but only a strangled rasp escaped. His chest heaved, his body convulsing with silent sobs. He was shaking violently now, a seismic tremor rattling his very bones. He felt himself gently turned, then pressed against something solid, warm, unyielding. Finn. He was being held. Not just a comforting arm, but a full embrace. Finn's arms wrapped tightly around his back, drawing him close until their chests aligned. He could feel the strong, rhythmic thump of Finn's heart against his own, a steady counterpoint to the chaotic drumming in his ears, a lifeline in the churning ocean of his panic. "Breathe with me, Leo," Finn murmured, his voice a low rumble against Leo's ear. "Just breathe. You're safe. I've got you." The words, simple and direct, offered a tiny anchor. Leo tried to synchronize with Finn's breath, the slow, deliberate rise and fall of his chest. It was agonizingly difficult. His own lungs felt like deflated balloons, stubbornly refusing to expand. He clawed at Finn's shirt, his fingers bunching the soft cotton, a desperate attempt to ground himself. Finn didn't flinch, merely held him tighter, his presence an unwavering column of strength. Leo felt the heat radiating from Finn's body, a comforting warmth against his cold, clammy skin. He buried his face in Finn's shoulder, inhaling his scent. Clean laundry, a hint of wood smoke from the fireplace, and something uniquely Finn, something that smelled like home. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, the internal roar began to recede, replaced by the persistent thumping of Finn's heart. Thump, 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 thump. Each beat offered reassurance, a testament to life, to presence, to an undeniable reality beyond the suffocating confines of his own mind. The tremor in his body began to diminish, the violent shakes yielding to a softer, more manageable tremble. He was still profoundly afraid, but the fear was no longer all-consuming. It was a receding tide, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. And in its wake, something else stirred. Pressed so closely to Finn, their bodies seemed to merge, every curve and plane aligning. He felt the strength in Finn's arms, the solid warmth of his chest, the gentle pressure of Finn's cheek against his hair. It transcended mere comfort. It was a profound sense of safety, a visceral need for protection he hadn't realized he craved, deeper than words, deeper than friendship. His own heart, which had been racing like a hummingbird's, began to find a new rhythm. It still beat fast, but not from terror. This was a different kind of quickening, a strange, confusing warmth blooming in his chest, radiating outwards. He felt Finn's breath ghost across his temple, the soft tickle sending an unexpected shiver down his spine. He realized, with a surprisingly pleasant jolt, that his heart wasn't just beating fast because Finn was holding him, but for Finn, for his quiet strength, his unwavering presence, the gentle touch that had pulled him back from the brink. It was a yearning, a desperate, undeniable pull towards this man who held him so tenderly, so completely. He lifted his head slightly, his eyes still blurred with unshed tears, and met Finn's gaze. Finn's eyes, usually so calm, were clouded with concern, but also with something else, something soft and understanding. In them, Leo saw no judgment, only acceptance, only a steadfast, unwavering empathy that pierced through the last vestiges of his fear. An overwhelming urge arose to close the small distance between them, to lean in, to press his lips against Finn's, to taste the unspoken comfort emanating from him. The thought was startling, electrifying, a sudden, bright flash of desire in the aftermath of the storm. It was confusing, terrifying, and undeniably real. He was still trembling, but now it was a different kind of tremor, one that hummed with a nascent energy, a profound sense of connection that transcended the boundaries of their long-standing friendship. Finn's heartbeat, steady and strong, continued to resonate against his own, a shared rhythm that felt both utterly new and deeply, profoundly familiar. He was safe, and in that safety, a new, deeper storm had just begun to gather. At the whisper of a kiss, the last vestiges of panic dissipated, leaving Leo drained yet remarkably clear-headed. He blinked, the hazy edges of his vision sharpening to register Finn's face, mere inches away. Finn's breath, warm and even, feathered across his cheek. Their gazes locked, and in that instant, the universe contracted to encompass only them. The frantic thoughts, the suffocating dread, all vanished, replaced by the silent thrum of unspoken understanding. Finn's eyes, a deep and enigmatic pool, nevertheless conveyed a current of recognition. It was a familiar sensation, yet profoundly altered, now imbued with a raw, nascent quality. He perceived the lingering concern, yes, but beneath it, a profound tenderness that resonated with a long-dormant ache in his own heart. The air between them, thick with the storm's aftermath, now vibrated with electric possibility. Leo swallowed, his throat parched. He felt the residual tremor in his hands, still cradled within Finn's. Finn's thumbs caressed his knuckles, a small, eloquent gesture of reassurance. The quiet strength of Finn's presence had been his lifeline, grounding him as he spiraled into disarray. It wasn't merely comfort, it was an anchor. And within that anchor, Leo realized, lay a deep-seated strength he hadn't known he yearned for. He observed Finn's slightly parted lips, the faint stubble tracing his jawline. A sudden, undeniable yearning surged through him, a desire so potent it stole his breath. This wasn't born of desperation or loneliness, but something far more fundamental, the recognition of a missing piece finally slotting into place. He longed to bridge the minuscule space separating them, to feel Finn's touch, not just on his hands, but everywhere. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Leo leaned closer, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden stillness of the room. Every fibre of his being was attuned to this singular moment, every nerve alive. He searched Finn's eyes for any flicker of hesitation, any sign of rejection, but Finn didn't recoil. His gaze remained steady, intense, mirroring Leo's unspoken question. If anything, Finn subtly tilted his head, a silent invitation that sent a jolt through Leo's core. The scent of Finn, a subtle blend of old spice, coffee, and something uniquely clean and earthy, intoxicated Leo's senses. The world beyond their shared space ceased to exist. There was only the soft intake of breath, the rustle of fabric, the escalating beat of his own heart. He felt a tremor run through Finn's hand, a reciprocal current that affirmed this was no mere fantasy. Their lips met. It was soft, tentative, a feather-light brush that barely registered at first. A silent inquiry, a gentle promise. There was no urgency, no aggressive demand, just a profound tenderness that permeated Leo's very being. It was a kiss that felt both utterly new and impossibly familiar, like a homecoming to a place he hadn't known he'd been searching for his entire life. Leo's eyes fluttered shut, allowing himself to surrender to the sensation. The warmth spread from his lips, blossoming through his chest, chasing away the last vestiges of cold fear. He felt the soft give of Finn's mouth, the subtle pressure against his own. It was a wordless conversation, a raw, honest exchange of emotion that bypassed all the carefully constructed walls Leo had erected. He responded instinctively, deepening the kiss just a fraction, a silent plea for more. Finn's hand, still cradling his, tightened almost imperceptibly. He felt a sigh escape Finn's lips, a soft, breathy sound that vibrated against his own. It wasn't a fiery, passionate kiss, but something far more profound. An affirmation, a recognition, a quiet blossoming of connection that transcended the physical. This was vulnerability laid bare, a sacred space where the usual defences dissolved. The years of shared history, the quiet understanding, the recent upheaval of Leo's carefully curated life, it all coalesced into this singular, transformative moment. It was a kiss that tasted of saline tears and unspoken longing, of patient support and dawning realization. It was the whisper of a new beginning, a fragile, exquisite hope blooming in the aftermath of desolation. When they finally drew apart, it was with a reluctant slowness, their lips lingering for a fraction of a second before separating. Leo opened his eyes to find Finn's still closed, his brow slightly furrowed as if processing an immense weight. Then Finn's eyes opened, slowly, revealing the same deep, enigmatic pool, but now with a flicker of something raw and exposed. Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy or awkward. It was a comfortable quiet, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Leo's heart was still thrumming, but it was a softer, steadier beat now, resonating with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. He didn't know what came next, didn't even dare to speculate. All he knew was that in Finn's arms, after the terror had subsided, he had discovered something he hadn't even known he was missing. The world might still be a chaotic mess, but for this fleeting, precious moment, he felt utterly, completely whole. An empty bed, a racing mind. The morning light, pale and diffused, painted the unfamiliar ceiling of Finn's guest room in soft hues. Leo stirred, a warmth lingering beneath his skin that had nothing to do with the sun's nascent rays. He stretched, his muscles protesting slightly, then his eyes snapped open. The other side of the bed was empty. Not just empty, but undisturbed. The pillow still plump and smooth. A cold tendril of anxiety snaked through him, tightening its grip on his chest. He sat up abruptly, the sheet pooling around his waist. Finn was gone. No sound of movement from the kitchen, no familiar scent of coffee brewing, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator from somewhere beyond the closed door. Panic, sharp and unwelcome, began to prickle at the edges of his calm. Had he dreamt it? The kiss, the tenderness, the unexpected depth of feeling that had surged through him, leaving him breathless and exposed. It had felt so real, so right. His gaze fell upon the nightstand. A small, folded square of paper rested beside the bedside lamp. His name, written in Finn's neat, unassuming script, was visible on the outside. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly. Leo, had an early call from work, ran out the door. Coffee's made, there's bread for toast. Help yourself to whatever's in the fridge. I'll be back as soon as I can. Don't worry about anything. Finn. The note was brief, almost perfunctory. No mention of last night, no lingering sentiment. The words, simple and practical, offered no reassurance, no hint of what the kiss had meant to Finn, or if it had meant anything at all. Leo slumped back against the pillows, the paper clutched in his hand. The initial surge of relief that Finn hadn't simply vanished, leaving him to an abyss of unanswered questions, was quickly overshadowed by a fresh wave of fear. Was this Finn's quiet way of retreating? A polite, understated dismissal of something that, for Leo, felt monumental. He had poured out his soul, laid bare his deepest fears and vulnerabilities, and then, in a moment of raw, unguarded intimacy, they had kissed. He had felt the world shift on its axis. A profound sense of coming home he hadn't known he was missing. Had he misinterpreted it all? Had he pushed too far? He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He, Leo Maxwell, the man who prided himself on control, on navigating complex business deals with an unshakable resolve, felt utterly lost. The facade of strength he usually presented to the world felt like a flimsy paper shield, easily shredded by the simplest human emotions. He had always believed his true strength lay in stoicism, in weathering storms alone. But last night, in Finn's arms, he had discovered a different kind of power, the power of shared vulnerability, of allowing another person to witness and hold his fractured pieces. He pushed himself out of bed, the cool air raising goosebumps on his skin. He pulled on a pair of sweatpants he'd found in the closet and padded barefoot into the quiet apartment. The air was still, pregnant with the silent echoes of last night's confessions. He walked through the living room, the sofa where they had sat, the lamp that had cast long shadows, all silent witnesses to his unravelling. The memory of Finn's touch, the gentle pressure of his lips, the way his hand had cradled Leo's jaw, replayed in his mind in vivid, almost excruciating detail. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a conversation, a silent promise, an affirmation of a connection that ran deeper than friendship. Or so Leo had hoped. He moved into the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee a welcome anchor in his swirling thoughts. Finn had indeed left a full pot, its dark surface reflecting the muted morning light. He poured himself a mug, the warmth seeping into his hands, but it did little to quell the chill of uncertainty spreading through him. He leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the familiar cityscape, now seen through a new lens. Every corner of this apartment, every quiet moment shared with Finn, had slowly, patiently, chipped away at the walls Leo had meticulously built around himself. Finn hadn't demanded anything, hadn't pushed, hadn't judged. He had simply been there, a steadfast presence in Leo's chaotic world. It was a quiet power, this unwavering connection, a force more potent than any grand gesture. Leo thought of his former life, the sprawling penthouse, the designer suits, the endless pursuit of success. It all felt hollow now, a beautiful cage that had trapped him in a gilded isolation. He had mistaken material wealth for fulfillment, a flawless exterior for inner peace. He had been strong, yes, in the superficial sense, but utterly alone. And now, in Finn's simple, comforting space, he understood the true cost of that facade. He took a sip of coffee, the bitter warmth a stark contrast to the sweetness of his memories. He pictured Finn, his quiet smile, the way his eyes held a depth of understanding that few others possessed. He realized, with a startling clarity that stole his breath, how profoundly important Finn had become to him. More than a friend, more than a confidant, Finn was the quiet anchor that kept him from drifting out to sea, the steady light in his suddenly dark world. The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through him. What if he had ruined it? What if, in his desperation for connection, he had misread Finn's kindness for something more? He replayed every interaction, searching for clues, for any sign that Finn felt the same intensity, the same seismic shift, the lingering touch, the soft gaze, the tender words of comfort. They all pointed to something deeper than mere friendship. But Finn was kind, inherently so. It was his nature to care, to offer solace. He walked back to the guest room, the note still crumpled in his hand. He smoothed it out, reading it again, searching for a hidden meaning between the lines. Don't worry about anything. Was that a genuine reassurance, or a subtle plea for Leo to forget what had transpired? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He felt like a raw nerve ending, exposed and vulnerable. He wanted Finn to come back, to explain, to confirm that last night wasn't just a fleeting moment of shared emotion, but the beginning of something real, something profound. He wanted to hear it, to see it in Finn's eyes, to feel the reassuring warmth of his presence. The apartment felt too big, too silent, amplifying the frantic thoughts echoing in his mind. He needed Finn. Not just as a friend, not just as a refuge, but as the quiet, steady beat that had unexpectedly harmonized with his own fractured rhythm. And the terrifying truth was, he had no idea if Finn felt the same. The road back, the city, a hushed palette of greys and blues, blurred into a watercolour as Leo emerged from Finn's building. The air, crisp and hinting at rain, felt altered, not by the weather's caprice, but by an internal shift. The gnawing anxiety of hours past had receded, replaced by a quiet, resolute thrum. Finn's terse practical note still resonated with a pang of emotional ambiguity, yet the ache it left was no longer despair, but a potent catalyst. Leo's stride, usually brisk and driven, now held a measured gravitas, each step weighted by a momentous decision. Moahri, the city's familiar pulse, once the comforting score to his ambition, now seemed distant, muffled. His mind, typically a whirlwind of schedules and market figures, fixated singularly on Finn. Finn's crinkling eyes when he smiled, the soothing cadence of his voice, the unexpected strength in his touch. Their shared vulnerability, raw and unvarnished, had forged a bond Leo hadn't known possible, let alone craved. The kiss, fleeting yet profoundly intimate, had shattered the final shards of his carefully constructed emotional fortress. He yearned to decipher it, to re-experience it, to build upon it. He hailed a taxi, the action almost unconscious. The driver, a boisterous man with an anecdote for every traffic light, attempted conversation. Leo offered clipped, polite replies, his gaze fixed on the blurred urban landscape. He was returning not to a haven, but to the gilded cage he'd meticulously built. The irony was a bitter tang on his tongue. Mr. Henderson, the doorman whose tenure predated Leo's residency, offered a knowing smile. "Morning, Mr. Maxwell. Haven't seen you around." Leo managed a tight-lipped smile in return. "Morning, Henderson. Been away." The elevator's ascent was a slow climb into an echoing hush. The penthouse, his supposed zenith of success, awaited. The heavy, ornate door clicked open, the sound resonating through the vast, empty space. His apartment, a monument to his ambition, a relic of his past life, spread before him. Acres of polished marble, gleaming chrome, bespoke furnishings. The panoramic windows framed a breathtaking city vista, a canvas of concrete and steel stretching to the horizon. Once a source of fierce pride, a tangible testament to his achievements, it now felt sterile. He moved through the silent rooms, his footsteps absorbed by plush, hand-knotted rugs. The living room, designed for lavish entertaining, felt cavernous without a single voice to fill it. The sprawling dining table, set for 12, hosted only dust motes dancing in the morning light. The master bedroom, a suite of tranquil greys and blues, still held the faint ghost of his ex-wife's expensive perfume, a scent that now evoked a dull ache of what was lost, not longing. The meticulous order, the artfully arranged decor, the utter absence of personal clutter, it all screamed of a life curated for show, not for living. He ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of a marble console. Every object here had been chosen for its aesthetic value, its perceived status, its ability to impress. Not a single item held sentimental resonance. Not a single piece told a story beyond its price tag. The realization struck him with physical force. He had spent years building this empire, accumulating these possessions, convinced they would deliver happiness, security, belonging. Instead, they had become a monument to his profound isolation. The facade of strength he'd maintained, the impenetrable confidence he'd projected, had been a shield against vulnerability. He'd believed any chink in his armor, any revelation of weakness would be exploited. He had chased success, power, wealth, believing these to be the true measures of a man, the guarantors of a fulfilling life. But the truth was stark and undeniable. He was wealthy, powerful, and utterly, profoundly alone. He thought of Finn's small apartment, filled with mismatched furniture, overflowing bookshelves, the comforting aroma of brewing coffee. It wasn't opulent, not grand, but it was alive. It was a home, not a showroom. And Finn, with his quiet resilience, his unwavering empathy, his gentle probing, had seen past Leo's polished exterior to the raw, crumbling man beneath. He had offered a safe harbour, a space where Leo could finally dismantle his defences without fear of judgment. The image of Finn's face, etched with concern as Leo recounted his trauma, the soft brush of his lips against Leo's, the unexpected tenderness of his embrace, it all coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. This opulent emptiness was no longer sustainable. He didn't want a life of curated perfection. He wanted a life of genuine connection. He didn't want to be perceived as strong. He wanted to be truly vulnerable, truly seen, truly loved. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city that had once been his playground. He saw not just buildings, but lives unfolding within them. Families, friends, lovers, strangers connecting, sharing, enduring. He had been so consumed by his own ambition, so dedicated to maintaining his image, that he had forgotten the simple, profound beauty of human connection. A sudden, fierce determination surged through him. He wouldn't retreat. He wouldn't let the fear of vulnerability, the sting of potential rejection, dictate his future. The morning's anxiety, the fear he had misread Finn, that he had overstepped, still lingered, a low thrum beneath his resolve, but it no longer paralysed him. It was a challenge. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Finn's contact. He needed to talk to him, to explain, to ask. He needed to be brave, not just in business, but in his heart. This grand apartment, this life of isolated luxury, was no longer his destination. It was a starting point. He had to go back, not just to Finn's apartment, but to the raw, uncertain territory of his own emotions. He had to fight for the connection he had found, for the possibility of a different kind of love, a love that wasn't about power or status, but about true intimacy and shared vulnerability. The road back wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Leo felt a stir of hope, a glimmer of light in the vast emptiness. He pressed call. Breaking the chains. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed a steady 3:17 a.m. Leo had been staring at it for hours, the luminous numbers a stark counterpoint to the inky blackness of the room. The grand apartment, once a fortress of his carefully curated life, now felt like a gilded cage. Every opulent detail, every expensive piece of art, every quiet corner whispered of Clara, and whispered of a life he could no longer inhabit. He reached for his phone, the cool metal a familiar anchor. His thumb hovered over Samir's contact. No, not Samir. Not yet. He needed to do this himself, without the buffer of his closest confidant. He scrolled further, past countless business associates and social acquaintances, until he found the name Elaine Peterson, divorce attorney. The name felt like a brand, searing itself into his consciousness. A deep, shuddering breath escaped him. This was it. The final, undeniable severance. He pressed the call button. The ringing seemed impossibly loud in the silent apartment, each chime a hammer blow against the fragile construct of his composure. Peterson and Associates, good morning. A crisp, professional voice answered on the third ring. It wasn't Elaine. Yes, good morning, Leo managed, his voice rough with disuse. Could I speak with Elaine Peterson? This is Leo Maxwell. There was a brief pause, then, "One moment, Mr. Maxwell, I'll connect you." The wait was agonizing. He pictured Clara, perhaps asleep in her own apartment, perhaps awake and staring at a similar clock, a similar emptiness. He pictured the easy grace of their early days, the shared laughter over expensive wine, the quiet comfort of their intertwined lives. And then the slow, insidious drift apart, the polite silences, the carefully maintained distance. The facade of strength they had both worn, perfect and unyielding, had been their undoing. It had held them captive. "Leo, this is Elaine. To what do I owe the early call?" Her voice was smooth, accustomed to navigating emotionally charged situations with a detached professionalism. "Elaine," he began, the word catching in his throat. He cleared it. I want to initiate divorce proceedings. With Clara." A beat of silence. "I see. And you're certain about this, Leo?" Her tone was gentle but firm. "Yes," he said, the word a steel rod forged in the crucible of his recent experiences. "I am." They spoke for nearly an hour, Elaine laying out the practicalities, the timelines, the necessary steps. Leo listened, his mind both numb and acutely aware, absorbing the details as if he were discussing a complex business acquisition. Yet beneath the detached veneer, a tempest raged. Each legal term, each logistical point was a nail hammered into the coffin of his past. When he finally hung up, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky a bruised violet. He stood by the panoramic window overlooking the city he had conquered, the world he had built. He felt a profound, aching sadness, a grief for what was lost, for the dreams that had withered, but intertwined with it a sharp, exhilarating tremor of freedom. The chains were breaking. He spent the morning in a fog, moving through the apartment like a ghost. The previous night's conversation with Finn, the raw vulnerability he had dared to show, the startling intimacy of their connection, it all hummed beneath his skin, a new, vibrant current. He felt like a different man, stripped bare, yet strangely more resilient. The man who had built this empire, who had chased success with a relentless fervour, seemed like a stranger. His phone buzzed. It was Samir. "Leo, you sound like you just wrestled a bear." Leo managed a weak laugh. "Something like that. You finally called Elaine, didn't you?" Samir's tone was knowing, devoid of judgment. "How did you know?" "I know you, Leo. I knew you needed to take that step before you could truly breathe. So how do you feel?" Leo walked to the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee a small comfort. "Empty, in a way, but also lighter, like a tremendous weight has been lifted." He paused, stirring a spoonful of sugar into his cup. "I've been thinking, Samir, a lot, about everything." "That's usually a good sign," Samir observed dryly. "My work, this company." Leo gestured vaguely around the vast apartment. It's not enough anymore. It feels hollow. The endless pursuit of more, of bigger, of better, it's just noise." Samir was silent for a moment, letting Leo's words hang in the air. "I'm listening, friend. I built this out of a need to prove something to myself, to my father, to the world, to escape, to hide. I piled up success like a shield." He took a sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through him. "But Finn, he showed me that none of it matters if you're alone, if you can't be vulnerable." "Finn has a way of doing that," Samir said, a note of fondness in his voice. "So what are you saying? You're going to sell the company and become a hermit?" Leo chuckled. "No, but I need to reevaluate. This relentless pace, the constant pressure, the 18-hour days. It's unsustainable. It's what drove Clara away, in part. It's what almost broke me." He ran a hand through his hair. "I want to do something meaningful, Samir. Something that connects me, not isolates me." "Meaningful how?" Samir pressed, ever practical. "I don't know yet, but I can't go back to the way things were. I can't just replace Clara with more work, more distractions. I need to build something new, something honest, something that leaves room for life." He thought of Finn, of the quiet strength in his eyes, the gentle reassurance in his touch. He thought of the possibility of a future where he could be truly seen, truly loved, not for his achievements, but for himself. "That's a big shift, Leo," Samir said, his voice thoughtful, "and not an easy one. But I think it's a good one. You've always been driven. Now maybe you can redirect that drive towards something that truly matters to you." The conversation continued, delving into the logistical nightmare of untangling himself from the day-to-day operations of his empire. Samir, ever the pragmatist, helped him sketch out a preliminary plan. The sheer scale of the task was daunting, but for the first time in months, Leo felt a spark of purpose, a genuine excitement for the road ahead. He was still reeling, still vulnerable, still heartbroken in some ways, but the old anchors had been cut. He was adrift, yes, but he was also free. And in that freedom there was a nascent hope, a quiet understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, this unravelling was actually a beginning. He still didn't know what tomorrow would bring with Finn, where that fragile, new connection would lead. But he knew this. He was ready to find out. He was ready to stop hiding. A conversation with Samir. The polished mahogany of the conference table, usually a bulwark of Leo's control, now felt like an altar for his immolation. He watched Samir enter, a faint crease already etched between his brows, a harbinger, perhaps, of the discussion ahead. Samir's customary briskness was muted, a lower thrum Leo immediately registered. "Leo!" Samir's voice was a low murmur, stripped of its usual morning effervescence. He settled into the opposing chair, his gaze direct and piercing. "You wanted to see me?" Leo inhaled slowly, the aroma of expensive coffee doing little to steady the tremor in his hands. "Samir, I've initiated divorce proceedings with Clara." The air in the room solidified. Samir's typically impassive expression faltered. His eyes widened imperceptibly, then narrowed, a fleeting shock giving way to guarded intensity. He offered no immediate reply, merely observing Leo, his silence amplifying the weight of the confession. "It's been brewing for a long time," Leo continued, the words feeling both inadequate and liberating. "Years, really. We've been leading parallel lives. It's over." The stark finality resonated, a melancholic echo in the silent space. A curious blend of sorrow and exhilarating release swirled within him. The gilded cage was finally shattering. Samir leaned back, his chair emitting a soft groan. He stroked his neatly trimmed beard, his usual rapid-fire responses noticeably absent. I'm truly sorry to hear that, Leo. I know it's not an easy decision." His voice was unexpectedly gentle, infused with a genuine concern that pierced through his gruff exterior. "Thank you," Leo responded, a knot in his chest loosening fractionally. "It's complex. There's sadness, of course, but also an undeniable sense of relief." He paused, searching for the precise articulation of the seismic shift occurring within him. "This entire empire we've constructed, Samir, it feels vacant, like a monument to a presumed desire, not an authentic need." Samir's gaze sharpened, a new assessing quality in his eyes. He picked up a pen from the table, twirling it idly. "Vacant, you say?" His tone wasn't dismissive, but rather contemplative. "That's a powerful word, Leo. We've built something extraordinary. A dream for most." "And what's the purpose?" Leo countered, his voice steady despite the internal tremor. "If it's founded on isolation, if it precludes genuine connection from truly being seen." He pictured Finn, the quiet strength in his friend's eyes, the way he listened without judgment. That, he realized, was true power, not the hollow accolades of the financial world. Samir set the pen down. "You're speaking of more than just the divorce, aren't you?" It wasn't a question, but an astute and direct observation. "You're talking about a transformation, a fundamental one." Leo nodded, a profound sense of validation washing over him. "I am. My entire life has been a pursuit of success, a belief that achievement equated to happiness, or at least respect. But it's been a constant performance, a charade of strength. And frankly, Samir, I'm exhausted. I want to shed the concealment. I want to forge a life that embraces vulnerability, meaningful connection, and work that feels impactful beyond the bottom line." Samir considered this, his dark eyes unwavering. "Impactful in what way? Philanthropy? A complete career redirection? Because, Leo, this firm, it's intrinsic to you. It's your legacy." "I'm not suggesting an outright abandonment," Leo clarified, though the notion had crossed his mind more than once. "But I can't sustain this pace with this singular focus. I need to reevaluate my role, my priorities. I want to explore avenues that align with a different kind of purpose, something that contributes to the world in a more direct, human way, not solely through financial leverage." A faint sigh escaped Samir. "All right, Leo, let's discuss the practicalities. Divorce is complex. It will demand your attention. We can adjust your workload, reallocate some of your oversight. Kareem can step up. He's been eager for more responsibility. We'll find a way to make this work, whatever this entails for you." Leo felt a wave of gratitude. Samir, for all his sternness, was unwavering. He wasn't questioning the why with derision, but immediately pivoting to the how. This quiet force of connection, this steadfast support, was precisely what he needed. "I appreciate that, Samir," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. More than you could know, this isn't a fleeting whim. This is an awakening, a profound one. I've been living a life that wasn't mine, and it's time to stop. And Clara? Samir inquired, his tone still practical, but with an underlying gentleness. How is she handling it? As well as can be expected, I suppose, Leo replied, a pang of sadness echoing in his chest. There's a lot of anger, naturally, but also a sense of acceptance, I think. We both know this marriage has been an empty shell for years. It's a grieving process for both of us, for what might have been, for what we tried to force. Samir nodded slowly. It will be challenging, but you're not alone in this. Professionally, I mean. The firm will weather this. We will weather this. I'll ensure it. He met Leo's gaze, his expression resolute. Just tell me what you need from me, Leo. What flexibility? What support? I need time, Leo admitted, feeling an immense weight lift from his shoulders. Time to discern what this new path looks like. Time to heal. To understand who I am, truly, without the incessant drive to prove myself through accumulation. He recalled the quiet moments with Finn, the feeling of simply being present without the need to perform. Samir leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. And personally, he asked, a rare flicker of curiosity in his voice, what does not alone mean for you outside these walls? Leo hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to utter Finn's name. Not yet. Not when the intimacy they shared felt so nascent, so fragile. It means cultivating authentic connections, allowing myself to be vulnerable, truly vulnerable, with people I trust, not just maintaining appearances. The words lingered, a silent testament to the man he was becoming. Samir studied him for a long moment, a subtle shift in his expression, a glimmer of understanding, perhaps even empathy. All right, he said, finally. Consider it done. We'll adjust your schedule. We'll manage the workload. Just keep me informed. I need to know what's happening, even if it's just that you need space. The quiet strength of Samir's support was a revelation. It wasn't a grand gesture, no dramatic pronouncements, just the steady, unwavering assurance of a trusted partner. It was a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty, a quiet promise that he wasn't adrift. Leo felt a warmth spread through him, a genuine sense of relief he hadn't anticipated. The facade of strength he'd maintained for so long was finally crumbling, and in its place he found not weakness, but a profound new sense of possibility. Thank you, Samir, Leo said again, the words imbued with a depth of feeling he rarely allowed himself to express. Truly, this means everything. He knew then that he was ready to face the messiness of divorce, the uncertainty of a new career trajectory, and the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of a life built on true connection. He was ready to stop hiding. Auntie Bee's wisdom, the aroma of dark roast and buttered croissants enveloped Leo as he stepped into the daily grind, a welcome haven from the generic coffee chains he'd endured for years. He'd just left Samir's office, a strange brew of fatigue and elation swirling within him. The divorce papers, though still in conceptual limbo, had already begun to dislodge a monumental weight from his spirit. He ordered a black coffee and a pastry, finding a small comfort in the simple transaction. As he surveyed the bustling room for an empty spot, a flash of vivid colour snagged his attention. At a window table sat a woman, her vibrant silver hair shot through with electric blue streaks, gesticulating wildly to an unseen companion. Her rich, resonant laughter cut through the cafe's gentle murmur. It took him a beat to recognise her, then a jolt, a mix of recognition and apprehension, hit him. Auntie Bee. Finn's aunt. His first instinct was to flee, to find another cafe, but he quickly dismissed the thought. What would that accomplish? He was done with evasion. With a deep breath and squared shoulders, he approached. Auntie Bee! His voice came out softer than intended. Her head spun, revealing bright, intelligent eyes crinkling at the corners. A broad smile bloomed, exposing a charming gap between her front teeth. Well, I'll be darned! Leo, isn't it? Finn's friend? She gestured to the vacant chair opposite her. Come, sit. Don't just loom like a confused giraffe. Leo chuckled, the tension dissipating. He pulled out the chair, settling in and placing his cup and pastry on the small round table. "It is. Good to see you. And you, darling. You seem unburdened, somehow, since last we met." Her gaze was unnervingly perceptive, as if she could trace the faint scars beneath his shirt, though still carrying a hint of the spectral, like a ghost reluctant to vacate its favourite armchair. He managed a wry smile, something like that. He hadn't realised how visibly his inner turmoil had manifested. "So, what brings you to this delightful little nook?" she asked, sweeping a hand around the cafe. "Slumming it, are we?" "Not at all," Leo replied, a genuine warmth spreading through him. "I like it here. It feels authentic." He sipped his coffee, its robust bitterness a pleasing counterpoint to the croissant's sweetness. Auntie B hummed, an amused glint in her eyes. "Authentic? Yes, that's a fine word. We spend so much time chasing gilded illusions, don't we? Gold-plated cages, designer handcuffs, mistaking them for liberty." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Finn mentioned you've undergone a rather significant upheaval." Leo's breath caught. He wasn't sure how much Finn might have divulged. "A monumental one, yes. Heard whispers of a wife, a departure, the grand dismantling of an edifice, as it were." She mimed a crumbling structure with her hands. "Good for you." Leo blinked. "Good for me? Oh, darling, sometimes the cosmos must shake you until your teeth rattle to get your attention. Demolition is messy, but essential if you intend to build something new, something real." She took a slow sip of her Earl Grey. "Finn said you're addressing the, legalities." "Yes," Leo confirmed, a blush creeping up his neck. "It's in motion." "Excellent. Don't waste another breath on what starves your spirit. Life's too fleeting for lukewarm connections and pretty deceptions." She reached across and patted his hand, her touch surprisingly firm and reassuring. "And what about Finn, eh?" "My Finn? He's a good soul, quiet but steadfast, like an ancient oak." Leo's heart gave a hopeful flutter. "He's incredible." The word escaped before he could edit it. Auntie B's eyes twinkled. "Incredible, you say? That's quite the commendation for my introverted nephew." She leaned back, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "He's always had a way of seeing the world and people with such clarity. No filters, no artifice, just honesty." "He does," Leo agreed, feeling a renewed surge of conviction. "He sees things I've spent my whole life trying to conceal. And that, my dear, is where the magic happens," Auntie B said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "When someone sees your broken edges, your tangled threads, and doesn't flinch, when they don't try to mend you, but simply sit with you in the chaos. That's precious. Rarer than a unicorn winning the lottery." A profound sense of understanding washed over Leo. This perfectly articulated Finn's approach. No solutions, no platitudes, just presence, quiet strength, unwavering empathy. "You know," she continued, her gaze drifting out the window, "love isn't always a grand explosion of fireworks and dramatic declarations. Sometimes it's a slow burn, a gentle unfolding, a steady hand in the dark, a quiet insistence on truly seeing you." She turned her piercing gaze back to Leo. "But even the quietest love requires courage to bloom. Courage to speak its name, courage to reach out, courage to choose vulnerability over the familiar shelter of solitude." Leo's mind flashed back to their kiss, the electric spark and his subsequent cowardly retreat. He had chosen solitude, the comfortable ache of known misery over the terrifying promise of something new, something real, something that demanded a level of honesty he wasn't sure he possessed. "You look like you've swallowed a particularly stubborn plum pit," Auntie B observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Don't overthink it, darling. The heart knows what it wants. The head just loves to complicate things." Leo began, then faltered, unable to articulate the storm of emotions within him. The fear of rejection, the shame of his past choices, the overwhelming intensity of his feelings for Finn. "Listen, Leo," she said, her voice softening, losing its playful edge. "Life is short. Too short for regrets. Too short for what-ifs. If something or someone makes your heart sing, even a faint melody, You owe it to yourself to explore that tune. Don't let fear conduct your symphony. She rummaged in her impossibly large, brightly patterned handbag, producing a small, intricately carved wooden bird. My grandmother gave me this, said it symbolized freedom and also taking flight. You can't fly with clipped wings, tucked safely away. She pressed it into his palm. A little reminder. Leo held the tiny bird, its smooth wood warm against his skin. "Thank you, Auntie B," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a great deal." "It means nothing if you don't heed it," she countered, a mischievous glint returning to her eyes. "Now, I must dash. I'm meeting a rather dashing young man for a spot of competitive bird watching. But remember what I said, darling. Courage. And don't be a fool. Finn's a rare gem." She winked, gathered her flamboyant scarf, and with a rustle of fabric and a final, bright smile, she was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of lavender and a profound sense of possibility. Leo sat for a long moment, the wooden bird clutched in his hand, the aroma of coffee gradually yielding to the more potent scent of hope. Auntie B's words, delivered with such effortless wisdom, had sliced through the cacophony of his anxieties. He had been a fool, a scared fool, sheltering behind the wreckage of his past, terrified to reach for the future, but not anymore. He looked at the tiny bird, then out the window at the bustling city. He had spent so long erecting walls, constructing an impenetrable facade. It was time to tear them all down, brick by painful brick, and build something true, something open, something that finally embraced the quiet power of connection. He shared a profound connection with Finn, one that deserved his courage, his honesty, his vulnerability. He finished his coffee, a new resolve hardening in his gut. The plum pit was gone. He knew what he had to do. And as near of the return and the promise. The click of the lock, familiar yet amplified by the silence of the hall, jolted Leo from his reverie. He'd been perched on Finn's worn sofa for what felt like eternity, the hum of the refrigerator a monotonous counterpoint to his racing heart. A shadow fell across the threshold, and then Finn stood there, travel bag slung over his shoulder, a slight weariness around his kind eyes. "Leo?" Finn's voice was a soft question, a ripple of surprise. He paused, the bag still weighting him down, taking in the scene, the half-empty teacup on the coffee table, a discarded magazine, and Leo, who had sprung to his feet the instant Finn appeared. Leo felt a surge of relief, so potent it nearly buckled his knees. He'd been a coiled spring all week, the conversation with Auntie B echoing in his mind, her words about courage and true connection sharpening his resolve. Now, seeing Finn, whole and real, a quiet calm began to settle over him, tempering the anticipation. "Hey," Leo managed, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He walked towards Finn, stopping a respectful distance away. He wanted to embrace him, to pull him close and bury his face in his shoulder, but he held back, a new kind of restraint guiding him. This moment demanded clarity, not impulse. Finn set his bag down with a thud, his gaze searching Leo's face. "Everything all right? You look different." His brow furrowed slightly, a hint of concern in his eyes. Finn's observation was precise, as always. Leo was different. The frantic energy that had once defined him, the desperate need to project an image of invincibility, had receded, replaced by a quiet hum of purpose. Leo took a steadying breath, the air thick with unspoken words. He met Finn's gaze directly, his own eyes, usually guarded, now open and vulnerable. There was no more pretense, no more hiding behind the carefully constructed facade of the successful businessman. The man standing before Finn was stripped bare, honest in a way he hadn't been in years. This wasn't the strength he'd once equated with power and control. This was a strength born of acceptance, of embracing the messy, imperfect truth of himself. It was a strength that resonated with the quiet power of connection Finn had always offered him. I have a lot to tell you," Leo began, his voice surprisingly steady. He gestured towards the sofa. "Can we sit?" Finn nodded, his expression unreadable, and settled onto the cushions. Leo sat opposite him, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees. The familiar scent of Finn's apartment, old books, brewing coffee, a faint trace of something herbaceous, enveloped him, grounding him. I started the divorce proceedings, Leo stated, the words feeling both heavy and liberating. Finn's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but he remained silent, simply watching, listening. This was Finn's gift, Leo realised, his unwavering presence, his patient understanding that allowed Leo the space to articulate the chaos within. It's done, or it's in motion anyway. Leo paused, exhaling slowly. It wasn't easy. There's a lot of grief, for what was, for what I thought I had. But there's also freedom, a kind of lightness I haven't felt in years. He looked at Finn, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. I'm not sure I even knew I was carrying all that weight until it started to lift. Finn offered a small, sympathetic smile in return, a silent acknowledgement of Leo's journey. And I've been doing a lot of thinking, meaning about everything, my life, my work, what I want. Leo shifted, suddenly feeling a tremor of nerves. This was it, the precipice. He had to be brave, as Auntie B had urged. He had to lay it all out, risks be damned. My work, it's not enough. It never was. It was always about achievement, about proving something, about filling a void, but it was empty. All of it. The penthouse, the trips, the image. It was all hollow. He shook his head, a ghost of his old self-loathing flickering in his eyes before he pushed it away. I don't want that anymore. I don't want the isolation. I want connection. Real connection. He met Finn's gaze again, and this time there was no mistaking the raw emotion swimming in Leo's eyes. He felt a profound sense of urgency, a need to convey the magnitude of what had shifted inside him. Finn, you've been there for me through all of this. When I was a wreck, when I was crumbling, you didn't judge me. You just were there. And that's meant everything. His voice grew softer, thicker with emotion. I thought I was strong. I thought I had to be, but my strength was a performance, a shield. You showed me that true strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and letting someone else see the pieces. It's about being vulnerable. It's about connection. He took another deep breath, the air catching in his throat. This was the hardest part, the most terrifying, the most exhilarating. And through all of it, Leo continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity, I realised something profound, something I should have seen a long time ago. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly for a moment before he gently placed it on Finn's arm. Finn didn't flinch, didn't pull away, his quiet presence an anchor in Leo's storm. I love you, Finn, Leo confessed, the words a gentle torrent, a dam finally breaking. I'm in love with you, and it's not just gratitude or friendship or comfort, it's everything. It's the way you look at me, the way you listen, the way you make me feel safe enough to be utterly myself. It's the quiet strength you always offer, the steady hand that's pulled me back from the edge more times than I can count. He squeezed Finn's arm, his eyes pleading for understanding, for acceptance. I want a life with you, a real life, one built on honesty, on connection, on us. I don't know what that looks like yet for my career, for anything, but I know I want you by my side. I want to build something new, something authentic with you. The silence that followed was thick, pregnant with possibility, with fear, with hope. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet stillness of the apartment. He had laid himself bare, offered his fragile, hopeful heart. Now all he could do was wait. Wait for Finn's response, for the answer that would either solidify this new, terrifyingly beautiful path or shatter it once more. He held Finn's gaze, his eyes filled with a raw, undeniable promise, a commitment to a future he was finally brave enough to claim. A new beginning. The words hung in the air, tangible, heavy with the weight of years unsaid, of truths hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed indifference. Leo watched Finn's face, searching for a flicker, a hint of what lay beneath the calm exterior. The silence stretched, an elastic band pulled taut, threatening to snap. Finn, Leo began again, his voice hoarse. I know this is a lot. I know I've been a wreck, a mess, and I've asked so much of you." He paused, gathering courage, the confession of love feeling both liberating and terrifying. "But you were there. You just were. And something shifted in me. Something fundamental." He saw Finn's gaze, steady and unwavering, a silent invitation to continue. It gave Leo the courage to lay bare the fractured landscape of his past. "My whole life, I've been chasing a phantom, a definition of success that was utterly hollow. My marriage to Clara, it was part of that facade, a beautiful, empty shell." The admission brought a fresh wave of grief, a mourning for a life he'd mistakenly believed was his destiny. "I filed for divorce, Finn. It's done. It's terrifying and sad and incredibly freeing." A small intake of breath from Finn was the only sound. Leo pressed on, the dam finally breaking. "I've spent so long hiding, pretending I had it all figured out, that I was invulnerable. But it was all a lie. The strength I projected was just a desperate attempt to keep the cracks from showing. True strength, I've learned, isn't about never breaking. It's about letting yourself shatter and then having the courage to pick up the pieces, to ask for help, to admit you're lost." He swallowed, his throat tight. "It's about being vulnerable. And you showed me that." He stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. The scent of Finn's familiar cedar and spice filled his senses, a comforting anchor in the stormy sea of his emotions. "You saw past the expensive suits and the carefully rehearsed smiles. You saw me, the real me, broken and scared, and you didn't flinch. You just held me." His voice dropped to a whisper, thick with emotion. "I love you, Finn. More than I ever thought possible. Not just as a friend, though that's profound in itself, but in a way that makes me want to tear down every wall I've ever built, to live a life that's honest and real and joyful with you." The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. He had said it. He had laid his soul bare. Now the waiting. Finn's eyes, usually so composed, glistened with unshed tears. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it cupped Leo's cheek. His touch was warm, electric, sending a shiver down Leo's spine. Finn's thumb traced the line of Leo's jaw, a feather-light caress that spoke volumes. "Leo!" Finn's voice was a low murmur, thick with emotion. You have no idea." He paused, taking a shaky breath, his gaze locked with Leo's. "When you first showed up at my door, a ghost of yourself, I thought you were just seeking refuge. I never imagined—" He shook his head, a faint, disbelieving smile playing on his lips. "I saw the pain, yes, but I also saw the man beneath the polished exterior. The man I'd always known was there, beneath all the ambition and the expectations." Finn's hand moved from Leo's cheek to intertwine with his fingers, squeezing gently. "You think you were hiding, Leo? I was too. Hiding this." He gestured vaguely between them. "This feeling that's been simmering for years, quietly beneath the surface of our friendship. I told myself it was just admiration, respect, but it was always more. So much more." A tear finally escaped Finn's eye, tracing a path down his temple. "To hear you say those words, to know that you see a future, an authentic life, with me." His voice caught, thick with emotion. He squeezed Leo's hand again, his grip firm and reassuring. "I love you too, Leo, more than words can express. It's been agonizing, watching you go through so much, wanting to reach out, to tell you how I felt, but knowing you had to find your own way, your own truth." Relief washed over Leo, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He hadn't dared to hope for such an unequivocal response. Finn's words were a balm to his raw, exposed heart. The anxiety that had been a constant companion for weeks, months even, began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of peace. "So," Leo managed, a shaky laugh escaping his lips, we're doing this?" Finn's smile widened, a radiant, genuine expression that transformed his face. "We're doing this, Leo. Whatever this turns out to be, we'll build it together, from the ground up, brick by honest brick. He stepped closer still, their bodies almost touching, the warmth emanating from Finn seeping into Leo's own chilled core. No more hiding, no more facades, just us, real. Leo reached out, his other hand finding Finn's waist, pulling him gently closer until their chests brushed. He could feel the steady rhythm of Finn's heartbeat against his own, a comforting counterpoint to his previously chaotic pulse. Finn's free hand came up, settling on Leo's neck, his thumb caressing the sensitive skin just behind his ear. Their eyes met, a silent conversation passing between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. It was a promise of patience, of discovery, of navigating uncharted waters together. It was the quiet acknowledgement that this was not just the end of one chapter, but the exhilarating, terrifying beginning of another. Leo leaned in, slowly, giving Finn every opportunity to pull away. But Finn didn't. Instead, he met Leo halfway, their lips finally meeting in a soft, tender kiss that was nothing like the urgent, desperate one from before. This kiss was an affirmation, a gentle promise of a future, yet unwritten, built on a foundation of shared vulnerability and profound love. It tasted of salt and hope and the sweet, dizzying promise of a new beginning. When they finally broke apart, breathless, a profound sense of calm settled over Leo. The world outside, with its looming divorce proceedings, its career uncertainties, its myriad demands, still existed. But now it felt manageable. He wasn't alone. He had Finn, and with him, the courage to rebuild his life, not from the ruins of what was, but from the fertile ground of what could be. This time the foundation would be solid, built on truth, vulnerability, and a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places. This time it would be real.